Let's talk.
John Brown.
The Bungalow Murderer, Patrcik Mahon and the Killing of Emily Kaye is a new book by Jonathan Oates that looks at one of the most notorious murders of the 1920s. It's been forgotten, but it has a lasting impact on the way that we look at crime and the way that we report crime. I'm delighted to say that the author of The Bungalow Murderer, Jonathan Oates, joins me now. Good morning to you, Jonathan.
Hello, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you. But tell me a little bit about then, because we tend to think, people are saying, well, you see, back in the day, the world was a much safer place and people didn't do horrible things to each other. Well, I'm sorry to upset people, but the Bungalow Murderer is a case against this.
That's right, yeah. I mean, it's absolutely appalling. It's not only a murder of an innocent, vulnerable woman. It's also the fact that after death, her body was chopped up into perhaps about 1,000 pieces. The head was never found, and parts of the body were burned. So when the detectives arrived at the scene of the crime, it was absolutely horrendous.
Tell me a little bit about then, I mean, how do you come across this particular case? Because I'm not aware of the Bungalow Murder, and I think that I probably should be. So explain to me a little bit of your background and how you stumbled across this one.
Well, I've been writing about true crime for the last 20 years, so I was aware of this murder, but I didn't know very much about it. And it was only in 2024 that I discovered that there had not been a properly researched full-length book on the topic since about 1932. The case actually referred to in an Agatha Christie story, and I thought, well, if this case hasn't been explored, and yet people do write about it in general books about Sussex murders, about crime and pathology, and so on. So it seemed to me that there's a gap in the market for a full-length, properly researched book on this topic.
And you see, when it comes down to it, when you look at these stories like that, you can just sort of feel a sympathy for them, because we always too often, it's the titillating thing is the murderer himself. But having read sort of through the notes on this one, I feel very sorry for Emily Kaye, because she doesn't know what she's got herself into. She seems to be she's not a classic victim, if you like. It seems to be a sort of athletic woman, and she's living off Russell Square in London, and she's got some money invested in stocks and shares, and she just comes into the clutches of what you could describe as a psychopathic cad, then, couldn't you, really?
Yeah, I mean, Emily Kaye, she was a white-collar worker, professional woman, had some good savings behind her. In her late 30s, she was living with other women at a women's block of flats off Russell Square, as you say. Seems perfectly normal individual, kind, and friends liked her and liked sport. But I guess that she was quite vulnerable in a way because she was single, and I think she probably wanted to be married and have children. And it's obviously very unfortunate for her that she came across such a terrible yet apparently charming man in the name of Patrcik Mahon.
Yeah, so Mahon is well known, isn't he? He's served time for jail time before, but that's for embezzlement and armed robbery. But I think that one of the things here which proves his downfall as well is the fact that he's got a wife who sticks with him even though he's philandered before.
Yeah, it's absolutely incredible. If it hadn't been for his wife finding a left luggage ticket, which fell out of his suit in the house when they lived, and then reported it to a private investigator, who then reported it to the police, and they found evidence of crime. The crime would not have ever been found out, probably. But Jessie was obviously a very respectable woman. She was an office worker. She had a couple rather had a daughter, and they were living in fairly comfortable surroundings in suburban Richmond.
So tell me about so presumably Mahon doesn't tell her anything about when he meets Emily. He doesn't know anything about this. They sort of strike up a relationship. Is it a physical relationship? Is it a platonic relationship? Tell me a little bit more about their relationship.
Well, it depends who you believe, basically,
Right.
because obviously Emily was dead, and so nobody could know the truth. But Patrick Mahon said it was physical right from the start, and he was seduced by this woman and so forth. But Emily's best friend, Edith Green, who lived in the flats with her, she had an entirely different story, and she said that she didn't think there was any sort of sexual content until possibly quite late on, when Emily and Patrick stayed together in a hotel in Southampton a few weeks before she was killed. So it was probably quite respectable, I think, at first.
Yeah.
And then they had sexual intercourse in a hotel in Southampton, and but that was quite towards the end of their relationship. But yeah.
I mean, there is something because a few things happen, don't they? Because I mean, she gets ill, she gets flu, and decides to go go to the seaside for her health, and then she does. You can think that maybe, I know it's the 20s, and maybe these things didn't happen, but she does say that she's met this man, and she's going to marry him, and they're going to go live in South Africa, and presumably if he's made those promises to her, then she's going to want to sort of spend some time with him before, in their little love nest by the coast, before they head off to South Africa later in the year.
Yeah, that's right. Basically, it is thought that they might have got engaged, and there's evidence that certainly a ring was purchased in Southampton, possibly by Emily or possibly by Patrick, we don't know.
Yeah.
And then the two of them, a few weeks later, briefly started to live together in the bungalow on the Crumbles near Eastbourne. And Patrick Mahon later said, and of course we only have his word for this, that this was a love experiment to see whether they could live together before being married. And certainly Emily did tell her friends and family that she had met a man, and they were going to get married and move to South Africa and start a new life there. So it all seemed, from her point of view, everything was going well.
And presumably his wife doesn't know about this, or she just thinks he's gone off for a business meeting, or he's gone off for a bit of fun. I mean, she's presumably blissfully unaware that her husband is supposedly planning to sort of marry and move off to South Africa.
Yeah, I'm afraid that Jessie Mahon, Patrick's wife, had no idea what was going on, and Patrick kept sending her telegrams to say, "Oh, well, I've been called away on business. I'm going to be a few days away," which, of course, he is. And then, he's very good at pulling the wool over his poor wife's eyes quite a lot of the time.
And what's even more shocking about this is that he's obviously carrying on, or he's having a love experiment with poor Emily. But in the meantime, and this made me drop my cup of tea in the morning, because also is an Ethel involved in it as well, or is that, have I got the right name?
Yeah, that's right. Ethel Duncan was a woman who he met walking along the streets in Richmond one evening, just literally a few days before he was to kill Emily.
Right.
And he started to chat her up, and what's the most shocking part of it is that after he'd killed Emily, put her in a trunk, he invited Ethel down to spend a weekend with him in the bungalow at the same time as there's a dead body in a trunk in one of the bedrooms, which is bizarre, it seems to me.
Well,
so, anyway.
That's psychopathic. I mean, that is sort of psychopathic behaviour, isn't it? I mean, so he's. I mean, we're not sure the exact timing or whatever, because obviously there's only one person. But he in the bungalow, he kills poor Emily. Gruesomely, obviously, disposes of the body parts or whatever, or doesn't, or puts them in a trunk, and then gets another woman to come and stay, blissfully unaware, presumably, of this. I mean, does she? I mean, presumably, poor Ethel doesn't see. I mean, are there are no scratches? There's no sign of violence on Mahon, then, presumably.
Well, I mean, she does see some women's shoes and a few other things like that in the flat, in the bungalow. And Patrick says, "Oh, well, that's just belongs to my wife, and nothing to be worried about." Yes, so she is very unaware of what's happened, and she even refers to Mahon as being very kind and charming man.
So anyway, he returns after his. He disposes. I won't tell people what because some people are probably still having their breakfast in Spain. But it's not nice, especially the head and stuff like that. So he has this another tryst with Ethel, and he goes back to the capital, and then it's when his wife seems to smell once again, a rat, and starts to go through his things.
Yeah, and she finds a left luggage ticket for some baggage at Waterloo railway station, and so she thinks that her husband might be having an affair with another woman, because it has happened before. He has a track record of this sort of thing. And then she calls in a private detective, and they go to Waterloo Station, and basically the private detective finds out various things in the luggage, and then he contacts the police at Scotland Yard.
Yeah, and among the things there are a tennis racket bag, apparently, with Emily's initials on it, and there's also a bloodstained knife and women's clothing. So that's going to set the police off, isn't it?
Yeah. So the police have a watch on the left luggage station, and a couple of days later, Patrick Mahon comes along to try and collect his bag, and that's when he's arrested and basically taken to Scotland Yard and interviewed by Detective Inspector Percy Savage.
So when the news starts, presumably there has been no record because Emily is a single woman. There's no, and this sounds awful, isn't it? There's no family. The people aren't looking for her. There's not a missing person. She's just one of these ladies who's gone away for a couple of days. So presumably, when how do the police sort of proceed, and do they sort of walk him back to the Crumbles, and do they find the trunk?
Well, at the beginning, the police really don't have much knowledge about what's happened whatsoever. As you say, there's no missing persons report or anything like that. And basically, Savage seems to bluff Mahon into telling him he has killed a woman called Emily Kaye in the bungalow at Eastbourne. But of course, Mahon explains it away as either accidental or self-defence. And then the police go down to the bungalow and make some very fearful discoveries, as you know. Yeah,
indeed. What excuse me. I mean, one of the things that we talk about the sexual relationship, but when the poor pathologist has to literally piece this case together, he finds out that she was 2 months pregnant as well. So that might have been a motive.
Well, that's what's a bonus bill to be claimed.
Right.
But, however, it has to be said that there's other evidence which suggests that she might not have been pregnant.
Right.
But we don't really know, because the uterus is missing, and what's there is inconclusive. And in fact, Emily's friend Edith Green says that literally just a few weeks before she died, Emily was having a period, which sort of suggests that there was there may well not have been a pregnancy. It's impossible to know, because of course all the body parts weren't found.
So we're looking at a case here, presumably, and again we can't back to this the golden 20s, the jazz age, and it's all sort of flappers and having a lovely time, but there is a prurient, this is sensationalism at best, and this is when newspapers obviously have far bigger coverage across the nation. This is the sort of thing that is going to grip, the nation, isn't it, in the crime pages, because you've got all the ingredients of a top story here. You've got a charming cad protagonist, you've got a poor woman, you've got the wife, and you've got a seaside cottage, in Eastbourne, which is a rather presumably salubrious part of the world at the time.
Yeah. I mean, the newspapers, both in this country and indeed France, actually, had great coverage of this story. People were interviewed, such as Ethel Duncan, for instance. There were big articles about the life of Patrick Mahon, big articles about the life of Emily Kaye. Massive coverage of this story. It was big news, not just in Eastbourne newspapers, but in national newspapers like the Times, and also other newspapers such as the Manchester Guardian. It was a big story. I think partly because of the shocking nature of what happened, and also the sexual element, I think, as well. So it did grip the public, and the newspapers certainly made the most they could of all this stuff. Even printed letters from Patrick Mahon to his wife as well. It
comes to trial in July, so that's quite quickly afterwards. He's apprehended, obviously, quite quickly. And then the case itself, the judgment itself is pretty swift. I think it only takes about sort of 4 days, doesn't it, for the case to proceed. And and you know he's going to receive the death penalty for this.
Yeah. I mean, it was a reasonably short trial, but then a lot of trials didn't take as many days as they would now. Where now we might have weeks or even months in some cases, but in those days, a trial for murder at an assize court or the Old Bailey could be several days. And this was not unusual length of time for that time. This was certainly wasn't manslaughter or accident. It was deemed murder, and therefore the death sentence was passed down. Although Mahon did appeal, but the appeal was turned down as well.
Because what's this? You know, in my notes it refers to the murder bag. Now, what is the murder bag? Is that the trunk, or is that something that the forensics bring to the scene? Explain a little bit about that, please, Jonathan.
Yeah, the murder bag is a really important aspect of this case, because when the police were investigating at the bungalow, Sir Bernard Spilsbury, the pathologist, he was quite shocked to see that they were actually moving and holding body parts with their bare hands, and he was really shocked and surprised at this, because he said, "Well, you know, aren't you concerned about the health dangers to yourselves in handling without any protection dead body parts?" And to cut a long story short, it was recommended sometime later that year that detectives should bring down with them what's called a murder bag, and it would have all the ingredients you would need to protect yourself when handling evidence, and also, just as importantly, to help preserve evidence from handling from other people. And so eventually, from the 1930s onwards, until relatively recently, a detective inspector investigating a case would bring the murder bag down with him, which have lots of things he would need, such as gloves, disinfectants, pincers, envelopes, putting in evidence. Some people even suggested that a bottle of whiskey was an essential ingredient too, but that obviously wasn't an official part of the murder bag. So that was a really important development that came out of this case that the police amazingly weren't doing before. It took the pathologist to see what actually happened at the scene of the crime to realise that something needed to change, and change it did.
And of course, eventually, Justice takes his course, and he's hanged at Wandsworth by is it Albert Pierpoint, the famous?
No, I think it's Albert Pierpoint. I don't think the famous post-war and World War II, of course, hangman. I recall. I think it was either his father or his uncle.
Right. Okay.
One of the Pierpoints. Yeah.
It was I wasn't aware that it was a family business. So there you go.
Indeed. Yeah. The Pierpoints were doing the business from the 1900s to the 1950s. It seems very much a family,
right?
A sort of family industry, yeah.
So how do you? I mean, why did you decide to? I mean, I think there was a CBS. Was it the CBS like a reconstruction series about this a while back? But
well, there was certainly there's a TV series called Crime at the Seaside. Yeah. I think I've got that right, and I think they did cover this case. And I don't recall. I have seen some of that series, but I don't recall seeing this one. But of course, it is only. I don't want to downplay or attack it, of course. Sure. But it is only 50 minutes long, and it's primarily people looking at well-known books and sources already. And in 50 minutes, you can't really do much more than present an outline of the case rather than delving deeply into the characters. And there's lots of characters here. And there's not only Patrcik Mahon, his wife, there's Ethel Duncan, Emily Kaye, and there's various other women who also were associated with Patrcik Mahon as well. So there's lots more that can be said in a full-scale book than you can say on a relatively short TV program. So,
did you actually go down to East London? I mean, are there any of the buildings still standing? Have the bungalows been demolished since then? I mean,
I'm afraid that there's nothing really there at all. Yeah. The bungalow was demolished in the 1950s,
right?
And the Crumbles itself, which is a vast area, or was a vast area of pebbly beach that spread for a long way east from Eastbourne up to Ormsby, well, certainly for several miles anyway. All that was built upon in the 1980s. If you went down there, I'm afraid all you would see is high-class housing that dates from the 1980s. So all the scene is obviously long gone, although it was a great tourist site in the 1920s, bizarrely.
So what are you hoping that people are going to discover? I mean, it is, as they always say, the truth is It's not much stranger than fiction, but it's certainly more compelling, isn't it, in this case than fiction? So this must have been a fascinating yet still a very hard thing to write because of the gruesomeness of the murder. So how was it to write, and what are you hoping that people will learn from the Bungalow Murderer?
Well, I think in terms of writing research, I think I have focused very much on the people involved in the story. I've given more of a voice, I believe, to Emily Kaye and also to Jessie Mahon, Mahon's wife. So I think the women in the story come across in a lot more detail than perhaps how they've been treated before. Ethel Duncan as well comes out as more of a character as well. So it's very much about people. So if you're interested in people, this is the book for you. Of course, I have to mention about the criminal aspects too, and of course that's very important as well. I hope I haven't overemphasised the horrific nature of the crime, although that is important, and it is important that people do realise this. But I think it's very much a human drama about the interaction between characters and how in some ways, how incredible Patrick Mahon was. He was having relationships with several different women all at the same time, none of whom had any idea what was going on. So it's about human relationships as much as it is crime. And I hope that people are interested in human relationships, both now and then, and also perhaps how people perceive people in the past as well. And I've discussed how journalists in the 1920s often wrote about individuals, and not always very sympathetically. Hopefully we'll be more sympathetic now to various people, especially victims of crime.
The book is called The Bungalow Murderer, Patrick Mahon and the Killing of Emily Kaye. It's out now. You can get it on Penny and Swords boards. You can also order it via our own virtual bookstore. It's by Jonathan Oates. Jonathan, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for inviting. Have a good day.